Hello, I'm Julian Goodacre and I'm a bagpipe maker. I make these bagpipes, I make them in Peebles, I've been doing it for years here. I also make tunes, and after I got over 200 of them, I decided to put them into a book. So a couple of years ago we published this book, which is called Some of Me Tunes and Some of Me Friends' Tunes, because my friends have dedicated tunes to me as well. I turned this into a show, which was in November at the Eastgate Theatre, and it was a great evening, but I could not have done it without all that support and help, technical and encouragement from the Eastgate Theatre. It was wonderful what they did for me. It's the Eastgate now that needs as much help and support as it can possibly get. So they've started putting together a whole range of different shows and entertainments, and my show is going to be shown in two parts. It's called Some of Me Tunes and Some of Me Friends' Tunes, but it's much more than music. There's dance, there's storytelling, there's poetry. It's a great evening. So make yourself a cup of tea and sit down and enjoy the first part, and next week the second part as well of the show. And if you've enjoyed it, would you consider possibly giving some donation to the Eastgate Open Door Campaign? Enjoy the show, because outside, I just want to say, outside the theatre there is a closed door, and in the old days you used to be able to press a button and the door would fly open. I'm looking for the time when that door flies open again. Thank you, enjoy it. Good evening. I've always found some tunes are infectious. They can spin around in my head, sometimes for days. So what should I do when an entirely new tune comes into my head? If I don't capture it immediately, it fades away and is lost forever. And that's the easy option. But for 40 years, I've chosen to capture as many as I can. There are months when no tunes arrive, and other times when new ones flood into my head. It's something over which I've got no control. And I don't read or write music, so capturing a tune involves playing it on a whistle into a recording device. For years, the task of putting them all together into a book had confounded me. In 2010, God, that's 9 years ago, however, I took positive action and conscripted Pete to be my official amanuensis, to help me turn them all into the very book that I'm now holding in my hands. So when did this all start? In March 1969, I embarked on a 21-month backpacking journey of self-discovery in Africa and the Far East. I'd been teaching myself to play the penny whistle and took one with me. I was concerned that it might get stolen, so I took a basic toolkit and made my first whistle out of an old tin can in Gardaia, which is an oasis town in central Sahara in Algeria. I made a few more as presents for fellow travellers in various cheesy hotels throughout the trip. This was the start of my instrument-making career. Here's one I made in the mountain provinces of the Philippines, and it still works surprisingly well. I made, as I said, the first one in Algeria, and about 2 months later, I was staying in a backpackers hotel, the Golden Hotel in Cairo, and I'd fallen in love with a lovely Swiss woman called Catherine, and so I called it to honour the hotel and her Golden Catherine. It was my first tune, and there was not another one for 10 years after that. So these are some of my friends. This is Steve, Andy, Pete, Callum and John Francis, and you'll get to see a lot more of them during the evening. And here's my wife.
Thank you. So unused to these things. I'm usually the other side of one. So, a tin whistle, in fact, this tin whistle, featured in a very early conversation I had with Julian. I called to see him on my way to Edinburgh, to visit my son, actually. This was about 12 years ago. And I didn't know him very well, but we sat together and chatted and played a tune. And he took my whistle from me and said, "Oh, you can tune this sort." And he took it fairly firmly in both hands, and there was a kind of creaking sound. And without a break, without a beat, he said, "And you can mend them too." And produced possibly the very tube of Araldite that he mentioned before, and I think dental floss.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So when he asked me to marry him, I knew I would be seeing a great deal of the making and mending and playing of bagpipes. And that was okay. I already knew that wherever Julian went, so did a large quantity of pipe boxes. And I really liked the quirky bits of furniture in his house made from the byproducts of bagpipe pipe making, like the towel rails in the bathroom had holes drilled all the way along them. Potentially playable, I suppose. But I didn't grasp, not until we started writing wedding day wish lists for people to come to our wedding, just how many people Julian has in his life. I mean, enormous numbers of friends. I thought I knew a lot of people, but he knows hundreds. And even before we got to friends, his brother John drew out family trees for us. So Julian got a family tree, a full-blown one of 27 living relatives, one's likely to come to the wedding, and I got a twig with 6. And it was similar with friends, a similar ratio. And I still don't actually know, it is a terrible admission, and of course you won't tell anybody, will you? But I don't really remember all the people that came to our wedding, because there were just so many new names to learn. And now we can be walking down the street, it's perfectly possible, and I see a couple of strangers, and Julian sort of hisses to me urgently, "Say hello," and I'm sort of, "Why?" And he says, "It's Angus and Primrose or somebody." And who are they? And they came to our wedding. You invited them. Okay. So I knew a bit about Julian. He knew a bit about me. But he didn't know everything, as didn't I, and especially in respect of dance. He's passionate about French music and dance, as you probably know, but his heart is English, and it beats in 2/4, 6/8, a regular 3/4 time. But he did not know much about the more obscure dances I do, in particular the one called polska. And not many people do, to be fair, not even in Sweden. Polska is the folk music of many parts of Sweden, and it's sort of in 3/time, but it's not quite. And I love it. I think it's really wonderful. And Julian was ever so willing to please me, his new lover. So we went to Sweden together, and that went really well. He made even more friends. Accordionists, bagpipers, dancers, fiddlers, of course. And he got quite enthusiastic about polska, so he agreed to sign up to come and learn to dance polska at a weekend I helped to organise in Yorkshire. This is a free bit of advertising. Get this. This is called Scandymoot, And it's kind of run by nerds for nerds, although we don't actually say that in the advertising. But it's pretty niche, to be fair. And I guess it must have been, for him going to dance polska for 3 days would be a bit like me volunteering to go and join in with the bagpipers talking about reed making. It was, it was not the usual way he wanted to spend his time. And although we carry on dancing together, his progress in dancing polska slowed down a bit after that. But I think something inspired him, and he wrote a tune called The Polskering Pigs. And you will find it in the book. It's on page 109, and it has the story that goes with it. And like every other word that he's written in that book, I promise you from the bottom of my heart that story is completely true. Not a word of a lie anywhere. The only problem is it isn't actually a polska. It's in ironical 6/8 time. But yeah, he still enjoys listening to polska. Thank you.
I've been making a range of different pipes in Peebles for ages, and in 1993, I finally developed one from a carving in Cornwall, the Cornish pipes. And there's this carving from 1504 of someone playing a bagpipe with 2 different chanters. And I made am I in the way? And I made 112 of those. No, 110. This is the 110th. But most of them are in the key of D. But since Callum has started working with me, we've been developing a different range. Some in C, and this is now in high G, and we've just developed last year the big one, the Beast of Bodmin, someone calls it. So we're now, because we got 2 chanters, that means we can play chords. So we call ourselves the Cornish Sextet. So we're going to play a tune of mine called Half My Life. Where should we stand? Yeah. none of this could have happened without Pete. He's been my friend for years and years. He's championed all my pipes. He's my webmaster. He's my amanuensis. He writes down all my tunes for. He actually created that book as well. He did all that. He's just amazing. His abilities just are incredible. And his composing techniques are really interesting. For my 49th birthday, 49 has always been a really big number for me, 7 sevens. He composed a tune, 7-part tune with 7 bars in each part, which is pretty fiendish. But he's gone on as I get older each year. Now and then he takes advantage of either writing a much simpler one because it's easier to divide up between 8s, or else get more and more complicated. Some of them really are fiendish. This one was not written for me or for my birthday. Pat had a 70th birthday party only a few years ago, and Pete decided to do something based on 70, and he discovered how difficult that was. And if you've got a program, you can read about it. It's got lots of numbers and divisions and things, which I'm not going to bore you with because I don't really understand it. Anyway, he's not got time this evening to play 70 years, so he's only giving Pat your first 35 years, apparently. And Pat's original name was Lindop, so this is called Lady Lindop's Lilt.
This is, for me, was a really strange tune to write, because most of the tunes that I've come up with are more or less dance tunes. This one was bewildering. As Julian said, it is based on figure 70. It has 3 parts, each with 10 bars in, which makes 30, and an extra 5-bar kind of coda, which makes 35. And so you have to play it twice in order to get 70, which is why I'm actually going to play Pat's second 35 years tonight. Each of the parts has 7 bars in it, 7 beats in a bar, although I defy you to count them. And the idea was that each part would also have 70 notes in, and I defy you to count that as well.
Our mum wrote extensive reminiscences, and my sister typed them all, Myrtle typed them all out, and after Mum's death, she distributed them among the family. Here's an extract. When Mr. Poulter had come to lunch and I'd taken a violent liking to him, I said I'd write him a letter. I was learning to read with Mummy and Daddy, and Daddy had taught me my letters, but in writing I was at an early stages. I must have been 4 or 5 at the most. We had Lillian Stoker staying with us at Chatham. She was a friend of Mummy's, and her husband, like Daddy, was serving overseas in Gallipoli. She gave me a spare sheet of her notepaper, and I began to write my letter by myself. I copied out a sentence from my easy reading book. I am on an ox. I then signed my name after a fashion, and then, to show I could also write numbers, I put 58. I'd been learning my numbers from Mummy's tape measure in her workbox, but it was old and the last 2 numbers were torn off. Mummy kindly addressed this missive in an envelope to Lieutenant D. Poulter in the officers' mess, where it absolutely mystified him and caused hilarity among his friends. He'd probably not noticed me when he was a lunch guest, so he did not know it was from me. The next time he visited us, I sprang at him and said, "Did you get my letter?" And all was revealed in stages. He asked why the word Gallipoli was written on the back of the notepaper, spelt several ways. Lillian's spare sheet of paper had been used by her for practice, and also what 58 meant. I explained and showed him Mummy's tape measure, and from then on he noticed me and we became great friends. He came and watched me have my bath and made a very durable line in brown paper boats to sail in it. The best of these he named in pencil, Ox 58, and she lasted several subsequent bath voyages. This was a reference to the famous Chatham dockyard building of submarines, which were numbered and lettered at that stage instead of being named. When I grew up, I realised that although I was obsessed by Mr. Poulter, it was probably admiration of my pretty mother that brought him in such a willing guest to our house. He was all of 18 or 19, and she was under 30, and he was far from his own home. I've kept his letters. He was killed in Gallipoli, and years later, in the 1950s, I saw an in memoriam notice about him in the Times, put in by his mother, which sounded as if he'd been an only child, but it gave no address, only his name, David, and Gallipoli, and the date. Mum had just one sibling, her older sister, Crystal, and here's another extract from Mum's reminiscences. Oh yeah, there's Mum and Crystal and her father. Daddy and Mummy had a joint hobby before 1914 to amuse us children and occupy themselves. It was a toy theatre with a stage for semi-march open at the top so that they could both stand behind and work the characters. There were real tiny curtains, there's one curtain there, and scenery and side flats that could be changed. The characters were what known before 1914 as penny dolls, made in Germany and really cost 1 penny. They were dressed by Mummy with great skill and mounted on leaden stands with a wire up to above stage height so that they could be controlled and spoke in suitable voices. Daddy wrote the plays, and Sister and I were never allowed to see how it all worked. There was an arrangement of curtains above the dining room table behind which they stood. Chairs were placed for the audience, and all they could see when they were shown to their chairs was a blank curtain, no parents, and a small theatre proscenium, and to wait for the curtain to open. The plays were magic ones of the kings and queens variety, into which Daddy introduced ingenious effects, imps, giants, etc., and his giant's voice was frightening. Later he got really ambitious and wrote a play called Maeve and Murmuring, Crystal, that's Crystal and Jacqueline, about 2 children at the seaside at Southbourne who became mermaids and swam across the stage behind a gauze transformation scene with a flowing water wave effect. The last actual performance would have been Maeve and Murmuring. The script is dated 18th of December 1918, when our mum was 9. Try to imagine the impact these performances would have made on her as a young girl in an age before the advent of talkies or television. This theatre only survived with its dolls, scenery and scripts in such good condition because my grandfather made a cunningly constructed plywood box which he finished on April 26, 1919. This is it's only possibly opened a few times in the last 100 years, and today is the first time the Crystal Theatre has ever been on public display. Now, a lot of the dolls are downstairs downstairs, you can see them. They're incredibly fragile, and they were all dressed by Mum. The Crystal, Mum was 13 when her father died in 1923. He'd never completely recovered from the wound that he received in Gallipoli in 1915. I feel a definite connection with my grandfather, Cunliffe Parsons, even though he died 27 years before I was born. Can humour and inventiveness be inherited? And how many of my traits and thought processes are inherited from him? Now, what do we have now? It's all on a piece of paper. Oh! I composed, I don't use the word compose. I made a tune in the 1990s, and I thought it was a bourrée. I wanted to give it to Sharon, my late wife, but she didn't want her name mentioned, so I called it the S and then B for Sharon Bourrée. And then I found out it had a third part, and so I called it the SB+. And we tried to play and gave up. I performed it once and it was a bit of a disaster because I just wasn't up to playing like that. So yesterday when we practiced was the first time I've really heard. I love, Sharon made this waistcoat actually. I love Sharon to hear you all playing it. It's so good. I'm not going to attempt to play it. I'm just going to sit here and enjoy. So on you go. Oh, wow, thank you. Wow. I get another pause to listen to music now as well. When Pat and me got married in 2010, we had a big event and a Scottish event. We had a big event in England and a Scottish event as well. And at Kinnersley Castle in Herefordshire was our first wedding, we called it, and half of you were there. And we asked friends not to give us presents, but we gave them a little piece of paper to write whatever they wanted to. And we got 23 different tunes given to us. And we're going to hear several of them tonight. And the next one is from Steve. And it's cleverly titled Mr. and Mrs. Goodacre's Wedding Mazurka. I think that's beautiful. Thank you. Wow. Time just flies up here. We've never played together all at once. Possibly we have. I don't know. But a lot of these we've played at various dance events. I mean, a lot of the music you're hearing tonight is dance music. And we played in various different combinations at different events. Pat runs dance events down at Kinnersley Castle in Herefordshire. And we had our first practice yesterday, and it's just been wonderful working with musicians like this. They've just really got behind it all. So It's been wonderful working with you all. The next tune, well, in fact the last tune, gosh, the time's flown, is called Mud Games, and there's a story behind that. So we'll play that, and afterwards you can come downstairs and see tune book and CDs, and all these people have produced tune books and everything, because they come up with amazing tunes as well, and also the dolls from a lot of the dolls, not all of them, because a lot of them are in very frail condition, they're back at home, but you can see some of them downstairs as well. So this tune I made in January 2013, and the name came from my son, Liam, who'd gone out to teach at Mahindra United World College near Pune, India. And he was writing a blog for the first few months, wonderful blog. He's been out in India for 7 years all in all. He's married a lovely Indian woman, but he's currently actually in Armenia, but that's a different story. Mud Games. One of the things... And he just arrived at this school. It was new for him. One of the things that made me realise that my students are still children is their need for games. Most of his kids, the kids were sort of between 16 and 17. Take a room full of uncomfortable first years and give them a game, and they become completely absorbed. Everyone go and touch as many heads as you can. It's delightful. First year orientation ended today with an optional all-college-wide session called Mud Games, which requires no description. This was monsoon time, by the way. I wandered down to the field and I found about 50 mud-covered students howling with laughter as they wrestled and ran after clean victims. I sat down next to Parag, a safe distance away, but one of my students pointed at me and shouted, "Let's get Liam!" 4 or 5 muddy boys, larger and stronger than I, ran for me and surrounded me like wolves. I stayed sitting. Each of them was waiting for someone else to make a move. It was a defining moment. My students have been confused about whether to treat me as a teacher or a student, knowing that I'm a young University United World College graduate. A drop of mud hit my newly washed shirt. They could so easily have carried me away to the muddy mess of students, giving me a loose reputation and an undue amount of laundry. I looked up calmly. All I said was, no. They backed off and slunk back towards the mud. The same 5 boys will vigorously discuss Plato in my class on Monday. So this tune, when it arrived, was a Calypso. I don't have any control over what tune's going to come next, and this just turned into a Calypso. So this is called Mud Games. I better tune, actually, I haven't played this yet. Give us a D. Okay, Calypso time.